Greetings, everybody. We are going to get started, and welcome to today's webinar about bridging the divide between regional educator prep programs and K-12 needs. My name is Kendra, and I'm a community designer and manager here at 100K10. And before we get started, we wanted to share a quick overview of what 100K10 is. 100K10 is a network that unites the nation's top academic institutions, nonprofits, foundations, companies, and government agencies to recruit and retain 100,000 excellent STEM teachers in the United States. And as we work towards this big goal, we're also addressing the underlying systemic challenges that have contributed to the pervasive shortage of STEM teachers nationwide. We call these systemic challenges the grand challenges. And if you'd like to learn more about the grand challenges and our network, I encourage you to visit 100kn10.org. Today on this webinar, you'll hear from leaders in our network who have been working together on a 100K10 project team about a specific project that they've developed. And you'll also have the opportunity to connect with others. And what are project teams, you ask? Project teams are small groups of 100K10 partners and invited guests who collaborate on a discrete, time-bound project that addresses the grand challenges. Today's webinar is led by a project team that's been working together since the beginning of 2018. And they'll present their project in just a moment. But first, we just wanted to cover some super quick housekeeping items. So we just wanted to share a little bit about your role as an attendee of this webinar. So first, please participate. We are trying out this kind of an interactive webinar, and we hope that this session will help be a seed or a jumping off point for you and thinking about how you could adapt or try out the tool that's going to be introduced here by the project team, or that you hear from somebody else in the webinar who you'd like to stay connected to after it ends. We'd love to hear at least one idea contributed from everybody here, if you're able to. As a heads up, this webinar will be recorded and it will be uploaded to YouTube after it's over. So just take care with what you're sharing. Just for example, be mindful if you're sharing information from your organization that isn't public yet, for example. We invite you to use the chat and actively. So there's a chat function here in Zoom in this application. So for all of our engagement today, unless the webinar hosts call on you to unmute yourself and speak aloud, just keep your mic muted and feel free to add any comments, questions, or if you encounter any tech trouble, feel free to type that right into the chat box. We really would love to hear any thoughts you have throughout the entire time, including during the project team's presentation. And the webinar hosts and folks from our team here at 100K10 will be keeping an eye on the chat box. Finally, we'd love your participation in a very quick 2-minute survey at the end of this time. So please stick around if you can. We would be really grateful to hear your feedback, and it helps us shape future webinars. You're going to receive materials at the end of today's webinar. We'll send you a link actually tomorrow with access to this team's actual project. You'll also get links to see their really exciting tool during today's webinar. So if folks are moving through slides really quickly, don't worry, you'll have a chance to dig into that tomorrow. Finally, if you're on the webinar today and you didn't register using our registration form, just send us a quick note in the chat box or feel free to email me at kendra@100kn10.org. So without further ado, I'd love to pass it over to the project team who will take it away for our time today.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are, as Kendra mentioned, we have been working on bridging the divide between regional educator preparation programs and K-12 needs. I would love to introduce our project team to you all. And as I'm doing that, if you all can in the chat, actually just tell me where in the country or world you are currently joining us from, just so everyone gets comfortable using the chat, because we hope that this will be an active dialogue throughout the conversation. So we are Melissa Moritz speaking. I serve as the Vice President of Strategic Initiatives for NIMSI, the National Math and Science Initiative. I am joined by my colleague Bill, my colleague Catherine, my colleague Rebecca, Ashley, and Rhonda, who all together, we joined together as a project team to address this particular challenge. We had a lot of fun and also learned a lot as we went through this work together, and we're both anxious and excited to share this work with you. So we set out to examine challenges and best practices in enabling a more regional approach to addressing STEM teacher shortages. And this really touches on the grand challenge around collaboration between local districts and teacher prep programs. Few districts and educator prep programs collaborate currently around how new STEM teachers are trained, which fails to create coherence between how an educator is prepared to teach during a preparation program and how an educator is expected to teach in a district classroom. Through doing this work, we realized that most of the symptoms, so lack of alignment on what is needed in the classroom, lack of ongoing and coherent support for educators, gaps of the number and type of educators prepared versus the number and type of educators who are needed, comes back to really developing strong, effective, and collaborative partnerships between K-12 districts and educator prep programs. So we set out as a team to figure out what makes a strong partnership and how could we foster more of them. Before we get too deep in the work and what we learned and the online tool we built, we want to learn, or we want to actually go there right now. So we felt, I'm going to turn it over to Bill to start with our first milestone and share a little bit more about what we did and what we learned.
Yeah, hello everybody. The project team started off with just general discussions about the overarching topic, which was bridging that divide, defining what that really meant. So, you know, as in good research, what you do is you go back to the literature. We read about collaboration and partnerships and what was already happening between teacher prep programs and school districts. So we started there. And as you can see there, milestone 2, there were some interviews that were conducted with school districts as well as teacher prep programs. And thanks to the connections with 100K and 10, we were able to hook up and conduct those interviews. And then the third thing that we did is interviewed some teachers and really tried to look at in-service teachers and going back to what their teacher prep program provided to them and seeing if there were other disconnects between how they were trained versus what they are experiencing in the classroom. And then lastly, when we met, we worked on this, what kind of tool could we design? And we really went through this extensive conversation and discussion to come up with something that would be valuable to both the teacher prep program and also the districts, so the partnership can be strong and can really advance teacher ed.
Thanks, Bill. I appreciate really articulating the process that we went through. So let's talk a little bit about what we learned. As we were working on our project, we realized two key things: that the root of many of the challenges we saw and that were articulated through the literature and through our interviews is a lack of strong partnership between educator preparation programs and school districts and school systems. And two, while we were working on this, it was very fortunate. CCSSO actually published a paper in February of 2018 that outlined a continuum and a rubric for self-assessing and strengthening partnerships in order to improve educator preparation. And this helped to inform our tool design and approach, allowing us to link directly to the publication that came out during our project team. I would love to turn it over to my colleague, Ashley, who is going to talk a little bit about what we learned from our interviews with educator prep programs.
Thanks, Melissa. So we interviewed 7 educator prep programs, and the common themes that emerged were that relationships are key, and partnerships are mostly based on personal relationships. Leadership changes makes sustaining those partnerships difficult. Districts often do not project beyond their immediate needs, making it hard for educator prep programs to adjust. All teacher prep programs would love to prepare more STEM teachers if they could find more candidates. Districts often look at shortages and focus on recruitment rather than retention. Partnering on grants and providing professional development builds trust and collaboration between districts and educator prep programs. And finally, navigating many different MOUs and processes can be challenging for a single educator prep program that sends candidates to many different school systems. So now Rhonda will share more with you about our interviews with school systems.
Thank you, Ashley. In the process, we also interviewed 3 school systems to ask about their partnerships and what made partnerships work well and what could be improved. So the following themes emerged. Number 1, when professors were practitioners and in K-12 schools, the relationship was stronger between the prep program and the district that it served. Number 2, the cycles of teacher preparation and workforce needs are sometimes just out of sync and created huge problems. Number 3, partnering on grant opportunities provided an opportunity to build trust, collaboration, and really align on shared goals. 4, the idea of personal relationships being key was a resounding message throughout all of the work that we did. They were key to building and maintaining relationships. It was just critical. And then 5, many school systems are building their own prep programs or establishing residency programs to address some ongoing challenges and need. 6, while STEM teachers were in great demand, STEM teachers who have experience and training supporting English language learners and diverse learners were in the greatest demand. We found that really interesting. So now I'll turn it over to Catherine to talk a little bit about what we learned from teachers. Catherine?
Thank you. We had over 30 responses from our teacher survey. The majority of our respondents were prepared in the traditional university settings, but we did have representation from alternative pathways and residency models as well. We had representation from new teachers and teachers who had been in the classroom for 10 or more years. While most teachers felt prepared by their program and classroom environment and instruction, many teachers felt there was room for improvement when it came to preparing them to work with students with disabilities and English language learners. Teachers also felt there was room for improvement when it came to STEM-specific skills, knowledge and dispositions, as well as integrating technology and using data to inform instruction. The teacher survey surfaced important disconnects between educator prep programs and the school systems where teachers are teaching, which further made the case for strengthening these relationships.
Thank you all so much for sharing a little bit about what we learned. I found it super interesting that throughout all of our conversations, a common thread from all of these audiences emerged around relationships being critically important, and that the need for STEM was really critical, but in particular, teachers who have both STEM experience and experience working with students with disabilities and experience working with English language learners, further showing sort of how all of the needs in education are interwoven together and how complex the world of relationship building and partnership building is. After our interviews, we then tried to figure out what tool could we design that might meet all of these individuals' needs. And I'll turn it over to Rebecca to talk a little bit about our design process.
I don't know if you can hear me. I'm having a little technical difficulty.
We can hear you great.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so when we went to the summit together, we decided to examine what we learned, and we set out to design this tool. We decided that we should ground our work in the CCS framework, just because it was well articulated, it was well understood, and it's from a source that many prep programs and district consult often and that they trust. We set out to build a dynamic tool that provides a diagnostic for any prep program or school district that maps to the CCSO framework. The quiz we came up with, it takes about 20 minutes and goes through the dimensions of successful partnership, and then it comes up with resources for the quiz taker at the end.
That's great. Thank you, Rebecca. So let's see it in action. So we developed a virtual tool, and the amazing Isis helped us to make it beautiful. So I'm going to open it. Hopefully it opens in Chrome for us, and the wonderful folks at 100K10 are going to put the link in the chat so you all can navigate along and play around with it as we talk. But basically, here's the tool. So you just simply scroll here. It also looks really nice on your phone, so you can take it anytime, anywhere. You know, if you're coming back if you're an educator prep program and you're coming back from a district meeting and you're like, oh man, this did not go well. You could pull this up on your phone. You could sort of say, okay, great. What are the resources that we can think about? Why did this meeting not go well? If you are trying to set out on a partnership and thinking about what resources are at your disposal, we basically just click begin. We have some background and links to the CCSSO paper. You tell us who you are, and then we go into each of the dimensions. And you basically give yourself a score that aligns to the four buckets that align to the CCSSO framework. And at the end, it tells you whether you have an emerging, developing, established, or transformational partnership. So I'll just click through randomly choosing, but obviously if you were a K-12 school district or representing K-12 school district or an educator prep program, you would want to think about your particular partnership and reflect on that. So this is around shared mission and beliefs, and do you have shared goals for your partnership? Do you have a positive impact on all partners? Again, I'm just clicking through quickly so that you can all see the resources at the end and how it all spits out. And you all are all welcome to play along as we go through. And I encourage those who are thinking about a particular partnership to actually use this tool and see what it tells you, and see whether that's how you might characterize it as well. And so once we get to the end of our quiz, and again, each of these things, so dissemination here aligns directly to the CCSSO paper, advocacy, all of these are the dimensions of effective partnership that CCSSO found out, or wrote there. So my partnership that I was imagining in my head is emerging. As you can see, there are 4 levels. So I have a little bit of work to do to take my partnership to be transformational. And here is the different dimension, my answer, and some resources that the project team pulled together in order to be able to support in these particular ways. In some cases, we pulled together case studies. In other cases, we pulled from resources coming outside of the field of education, but really tried to map them to the CCSSO framework and the particular dimensions of effective partnership. So that's our tool. And we would love to engage you all in a conversation around the tool. And I can tell you a little bit about what is coming next for our team. Part of what's next is testing this with you all and getting feedback on this call today. As it makes sense in our various organizational efforts, we plan to use this tool to help us to gauge the effectiveness of our partnerships. We are publishing this on the 100K10 Grand Challenges page that anyone can utilize, and are working to connect with CCSSO to determine if there are, refinements or opportunities that they see as well for their work. But before we turn it over to conversation, and we're really eager to hear your feedback and your questions, I do just want to underscore that so much of what we found comes down to this partnership question. So as you can imagine, we saw a lot of symptoms in our interviews. We heard people talk about the lack of funding for strong professional development for teachers. We heard conversations around a disconnect between how teachers are hired and onboarded. We heard a disconnect around some teachers needing access to this type of STEM material or culturally responsive pedagogy that they didn't have in their preparation program. And while all of those symptoms could be projects in and of themselves, and we encourage anyone on this call to make them projects because they are all huge, meaty issues, we really found that at the crux of all of those was really this notion of effective partners working together towards a shared goal. And we found that the CCSSO paper did a really good job articulating the components of effective partnership. And the case studies and places where we saw this going really well further articulated that. We could say like, yes, very clearly this relationship went well because these two places had a shared vision. Yes, these places went well because these two places had a shared, allocated resources appropriately. And so I just really wanted to summarize that for our project team, it was nearly impossible to address all of the particular symptoms. So we tried to really focus on the root cause of more and better effective partnership between K-12 and educator prep programs. So with that, would love to hear you all, any questions that you have, challenges, ideas, we're open to any and everything. And, if no one has anything, I have a bunch of things that I would love to get your take on. So I think now's a great opportunity to either chat a question, or Kendra, you can tell me if people should come off mute, whatever makes the most sense. Awesome. I see a question coming in around the list of best practices, particularly for people who are working with districts. So at the end, actually if you go to the Chrome tool, so let's see, tell me if you can see this, everybody. If you click up here and go more about this project, we have a summary, and we actually include all of the resources in the summary. So the summary gives a pretty much a similar story, except obviously less engaging and less three-dimensional than our conversation today, but does list out all of the resources towards the end here. And on the tool itself, the framework paper is linked right at the top, as well as 100K and 10's grand challenges. So you should have everything hopefully like housed in that one place. I also see a question around CMOs. We did engage one CMO out in the conversation, and there were some differences in terms of the challenges that they felt related to this disconnect. But what I will say is that there were some very common themes as well. Some of the disconnects happened just in terms of the way that teachers were recruited, and some of the narrative around charter schools that they felt like was really impacting particular recruitment efforts. So I found that to be a really interesting conversation. Were there others? Anyone else have anything to add on the CMO question? And I'm also seeing Carrie's second question on the transformational partnerships, and would love for others to weigh in on this one as well. Ed First also published a paper that has a number of case studies, and I'm happy to share that resource. I can look it up and put it in the chat for you. There's a number of case studies that are included there, and we utilized that. I will say for the purposes of interviews, we told everybody we would, keep their name and information and everything confidential and use it just for research purposes. But we found again that the grant opportunities seem to be a strong catalyst. And in places where there wasn't a one-to-one match between a teacher preparation program and the school district, like in a large urban hub, for example, ensuring that the district was taking the lead on managing all of the partnerships felt really crucial to both sides, because otherwise it was just too hard to manage. Others who want to chime in on the best practices or examples of transformational partnerships?
I will chime in. So I remember when we were interviewing some of our ed prep programs and they were discussing what their relationships were like with their districts. It was interesting because we had a chance to speak with one partner that works in both rural and urban districts, and thinking about how personal relationships truly did impact whether or not they successfully were able to either adjust that ed prep program or in the placement, right, of that teacher once they've been in the classroom. And so I think it's interesting to see that sometimes some of those smaller districts created more opportunities because they had fewer resources for the ed prep programs to connect with them than some of those larger districts, just because of the number of folks that are within those districts.
Great.
Carrie,
did we go ahead, Rhonda.
I was just going to say, one of the other things that we heard from the educator prep programs was that many of them were dealing with multiple districts with all lots of different needs and different approaches. And it was really difficult for them to work with multiple districts and have nothing similar in the way that they operated within that district. So something to think about from the educator perspective program.
Carrie, did we address your question? Is there anything else that you would want to share with us? Any ways that we could make this more useful for your particular context?
Nope, I'm just very excited to share it with our executive directors because, Rhonda, we definitely have that at Urban Teachers, and that's why I asked about the CMOs, because we work with both districts in different places and also many CMOs, and this looks like a really awesome tool to help us improve all those relationships. So I'm really excited. Thank you for all your hard work.
Of course. And I would just say, like, we can't make the partnerships better from where we sit, with the exception of our own partnerships that we're actively engaged in or that we hope to be engaged in. But our hope was that this tool can provide an opportunity for conversation, for alignment, that it links to, well-trusted frameworks that can get the conversation going, right? Like, and help you. One of the things I heard, not explicitly, but fairly implicitly in the conversations with educator prep programs and with the districts and CMOs that we talked to, was just like, there's a lot to do. There's a lot to do, and it's hard to know where to start. And so we're hoping that this can help people know where to start. If you have to prioritize one thing, here's the place that if you spend the most time on, this should have impact in terms of your partnership, because you are transformational in these other areas and emerging in these. So we're hoping to help that. Julie, great question. Do you want to actually ask that out loud? I think you might still be on mute. Anyway, I will repeat the question for those. The question is around strategies for mitigating the impact of staff turnover. And I think this is really critical, because you're right. A lot of the partnerships that we found right now were really individual. They were really based on personal relationships, and that obviously has a ton of implications. If the main champion of that partnership or the person who's been helping leaves, you kind of have to start at square one. I think that some of the partnership dimensions are pretty help to ensure a reflection on whether the partnership hinges too much on one individual or whether it's more of sort of an institutional partnership in nature. So my hope is that by the process of like reflecting on that, more places can move to ensuring that the partnership is not so dependent on one-to-one. Like, for example, if you have an action plan, if you have shared goals, if your mission and beliefs align, if the resource commitment is there, ideally that means that knowledge has been shared and many others are involved. But obviously that's not necessarily the case. But I would say the strength of the partnership, if the partnership is truly transformational, it would hopefully withstand potential turnover. Others, what would you add to that?
I think that's just the case of the partnership having policies and procedures in place that can help the turnover, which we know, that's unavoidable. So with the new person coming in, that they at least have a guideline to work from of the pre-existing partnership before they were in that position. So just being transparent and clear.
I think one of the things that we heard around this was that often those individual relationships were developed as a way to get around some of the complexity of working with the district at large, as opposed to an individual campus principal who might be more easily accessible. So some of these were really, relationships were built because there was no clear path to partnership without people going out and doing it on their own.
I love the comment from Carrie in the chat as well around the need to partner with local education organizations, so that it is really a sort of groundswell approach, right? I think that's really smart. How can folks on the phone see this used in their work? I'm curious to get a sense, like, which part of this feels helpful? Is it actually just the CCSSO paper? That's totally cool if it is. I'm curious, like, where you see this being used, or if you are like, it would be so much more useful if you could do these 3 things. I would also love to hear those things too. Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask and answer my own question, which is probably a poor facilitation form, but I'm going to do it anyway. One of the things I was interested in as we went through this was that I think these dimensions of partnership are not just applicable to K-12 districts and to educator preparation. So the dimensions of effective partnership to me likely apply across the board, that you might like tweak the language or the answers. But when I think about any strong partnership, organization to organization, 100K and 10 partner to 100K and 10 partner, 100K and 10 partner to non-100K and 10 partner, between, organizations that NIMSY is thinking about working with, I actually keep coming back to the different dimensions of partnership here and want to use them to be able to say, like, do we have a strong partnership? And if we don't yet have a partnership, what are the things that need to be in place in order for us to have a strong partnership? Great question, Rebecca, around analysis. Yes, so we are capturing it. We are going to utilize, we're going to capture and analyze. As you'll notice, we don't ask people to submit their names. We don't ask people to say who their partner is or isn't, because we don't, as organizations, like, we're not going to be the people who are diving in to say, oh no, partnership is emerging, we need to help you become transformational. But what we are going to do is look at, like, by type of program, what we generally find. Like, do we find that it's actually mostly nonprofit organization or mostly educator prep programs who are submitting these? Do we actually find that it's mostly not K-12 districts or educator prep programs, it's like other organizations? And what are some of the themes that we see emerging around where partnerships are strong and where there's room to grow? So we are planning to do some rough analysis, although not sort of pinpointing individual organizations, because we didn't feel that was our place to be able to intervene and meddle in other people's partnership universe. Anything else that the team would add to that?
Melissa, I'd like to say a little something. Rebecca, that is a great question, because capturing data and then doing no analysis is not good practice. So I think, we probably all have opinions of what we would see for anyone that were to use this tool. That probably partnerships are not as always strong as we would hope that they would be. So I think it'd be very cool to look at the results and then put them out. If you could get them in the hands of educator prep programs, that would be fantastic, because maybe those programs being a little bit more proactive with their own individual partnerships could get the ball rolling to get things, to make things better with the schools that they partner with.
Great. Sherry, I appreciate this. That's a great foundational piece, particularly at the beginning, and then to reassess throughout. A couple of additional resources that I would share with folks if they haven't. So the Ed First put together a paper that we also found to be really useful in our literature review that is much longer than the CCSSO framework, but does include some best practices. Team, what were some of your favorite resources that we stumbled across throughout the literature review and also the interviews? Any highlights that you would share in terms of both just like effective partnerships, but also maybe on some of the dimensions?
I actually enjoyed reading the quotes from in-service teachers about what teaching is really like compared to what they learned in their educator prep program, which is kind of like, a secondary part of bridging this divide, that ed prep programs need to better prepare teachers, and districts need to be a little bit more, have better long-term thinking and planning if possible, so they can let prep programs know what they need. But it was really interesting to read about what teachers say. And then, hopefully that's another thing, getting in-service teacher feedback back to the programs that train them could be vital in helping those programs consider changes for future, pre-service teachers. Yep. So they're better prepared, and, maybe it keeps them in teaching longer. Helps them to deal with some of these issues, because there's a lot of issues that are not teaching related. It's paperwork, it's admin, it's dealing with parents, and maybe including other things in ed prep programs other than just methods courses could really be important.
Bill, I'm so glad you brought that up, because there was a moment during our design where we were like, should we do this? Should we not? And I feel like the team really was like, if we're gonna articulate where the disconnect is and why this is happening, and if there is one, it is going to be in teachers' lived experience. They are the only humans who are crossing between the world of teacher prep and the world of like living as a K-12 educator. And I agree. I thought that like that to me would be like, if we had to recommend honestly like one practice, if you're in a partnership as an educator prep program in a K-12 school district or CMO, have a teacher survey that goes to all your teachers that asks them some questions. And we'd be happy to share the questions that we built. It literally was a 15-minute, 20-minute survey, and it illuminated a lot. But like that, if you want to reduce the gap and know whether you're narrowing progress over time, our tool, I think, can be very foundational and helpful, but you will get a lot if you just survey all your teachers and look at that data together.
I couldn't agree more. This is Catherine from Encore. I was really glad that Bill brought that up as well. I think, we had these responses actually from all over the country. And as we said, new teachers as well as teachers with 10 plus years of experience. But the responses were fair, some, traditionally trained, if you will, in a university setting, and some through an alternative credentialing program. But the answers as a group, although it's a small sample, and I do think it would be interesting to get a bigger sample, were fairly consistent in what they felt were lacking in their training. And you know, again, it was cited working with students with disabilities and working with English language learners, working with technology and use of technology. But I'm quite sure that there'd be some other things regionally that might be identified, but those areas were consistently identified throughout our sample. And that was an interesting takeaway for me from the teachers. And so maybe we haven't, you know, maybe higher ed needs to look at that. Maybe the credentialing programs need to look at that.
Yeah. And I assume we would be happy to share. I can think about the right way to do that, whether that's, you know, adding that or sharing that with 100K and 10. We're happy to share the questions that we asked. The team did a really good job looking at some existing tools and resources, trying to align to that. So if people are looking for an example, happy to share it.
Melissa, I think it was also interesting that when we started this project, we really thought that it was going to be more about data and that there weren't great partnerships because people didn't have the right data or enough data about teacher needs. And we found out very quickly that while that may be true, the relationships were still the things that were the most important in building a real partnership and ensuring that you had the data to make good decisions about hiring changes that needed to be made.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even more bluntly, Rhonda, when I started this, I was like, oh, it's probably just because people don't know the number and type of STEM teachers that are needed. Like, and so higher ed can't adjust. And and in the interviews, they were like, yeah, sure, that's a problem, but that's not the root problem. Like, that's not, and it really did come back to this concept of relationships. It came back to this, like, we need to work together in really targeted and like really strong ways. And I think what was so interesting in all of our conversations, like, despite telling us all the things that are absolutely wrong with partnerships right now, people were like generally pretty hopeful about the way that it could be. They were able to tell us what the ideal would look like. They were able to tell us examples of where things have gone well and why. And so it was just super interesting for all of those who, you know, work in like nonprofit and education sort of support organizations to think about like just even the questions that we ask and helping people and sort of trying to articulate what are examples of how things have gone well and why. And honestly, like, it doesn't have to come from outside. Most of the places that we talked to were able to say, this went well in the past and here's why. And when we had this MSP, it was amazing. And when we did this thing, it was incredible. And here's why it ended, or, you know, whatever. So I just want to make sure that like the thread around, like, there's a lot of reason to be hopeful for the partnerships improving also comes through, like, because clearly there's a lot of different ways we need to work to fix and a lot of different symptoms that people are quick to say, this is wrong and this is broken and this doesn't work and this is complex. But the tenor of our interviews was definitely very hopeful. Any final questions from the team or any final questions from the from the participants, or any last comments from the design team?
Again, this is Catherine. I strongly suggest that everyone take a look at that CCS framework. You know, despite the fact that we're not a you know, a teacher prep program, nor a school, I found that the elements of partnership were so strong. To your point earlier, Melissa, that you know, using those things as foundational building blocks for any partnership could be of value to any organization. and really making a commitment to all those components when you move forward in your business relationships could be of true value to your organization.
Great. Well, I will, Carrie, I see your note about Ed First. So what I'm going to do, I will make sure that we get it into the chat before we actually close this out so people have it. I don't want you all to like watch me Google around for what I'm looking for, but I will make sure it goes in the chat and make sure that we send it out to the group of attendees with the materials, because it's like very detailed and I think pretty interesting, less of a framework and more of some case studies, but both are very helpful tools and resources. Before we close out today, I just wanted to take a quick second to really thank the project team for all of the work and time that they have done. I mean, it just like incredible. We pivoted a lot of times. We thought we were going to do one thing. We ended up doing something totally different. The willingness to just be like, yep, great. Here's the need. Here we go. I also really appreciated that we were really user-centered in our approach. So did a lot of interviews, really tried to, when we were doing our design day, we really tried to think from the perspective of a K-12 school district or from an educator prep program after having done a whole bunch of interviews. And I think it helped us to get to a strong place. And then was also super grateful that folks were willing to, look through various resources and to find some really great tools. And would be remiss if I didn't thank the 100K and 10 team, and particularly ISIS for helping put together the final tool. Our Word doc, while very informative, was much less dynamic. And so we just appreciate the support that 100K and 10 provided and the framework for being able to do this work together, because I think we ended in a very different place than we thought as a result of having such a great group of partners, all trying to think about things from different angles and perspectives. So if folks want to follow up, feel free to send a note to me or anyone on the project team, but I'm happy to get you, get you in the right place. And then I'll turn it back over to Kendra, who will close us out, and I'll make sure to get the Ed First link for you all.
Thanks so much, Melissa. Big thanks to you and to Ashley, Bill, Rhonda, Rebecca, and Catherine. Thanks so much for leading today's webinar and sharing the tool. I think over here we were really excited to get to see you click through it. It was just cool to think about it in action. Thanks to everybody for sharing your questions and your feedback in the chat. And a quick note that Melissa shared her email address, but we'll also be connecting you all. For those of you who received the reminder email yesterday, you'll see everyone's email on the list. So if there's someone you want to follow up with, including the project team host, feel free to just keep that conversation going. We have just a couple minutes left, and we just wanted to direct your attention to your email inbox. You should have gotten an email from Team 100K and 10 that has a link to our super short 2-minute survey. So we wanted to just hold a couple minutes to allow you to complete that survey. Right now, it truly should take about 2 minutes or less. And if you didn't get an email, just feel free to tell us in the chat. You can direct message me or write me an email. So we're just going to take 2 minutes right now to hold for everybody.
Great. And Lauren, I actually emailed you the Ed First link. So if you want to throw that in, I don't know if you're on your email, but just...
So thanks very much for taking some time to share your feedback with us. Again, we really, truly appreciate it from 100K and 10. And tomorrow you'll get an email from us with a link to the Grand Challenges page that marks the progress of this project team, as well as a link to the executive summary that Melissa and co shared today, as well as a link to the tool. And we'll also share some of the relevant links that came up today in our email with you tomorrow. So thank you so much again. We look forward to staying in touch with you. And again, big congrats and thanks to the project team for leading today's webinar.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.